Hello, honeys, and welcome back to your weekly update on all things art world news from the last week. This time, we're talking November 16th through the 22nd. I wanted to give you a quick reminder about and a little bit of an apology for the delay on our Rockwell Thanksgiving special. We hit a little snag in the production there, but I promise it is coming as soon as possible. Hopefully, we'll have the editing and everything done so that it can be posted by the end of the day. We also wanted to highlight our 2 Substack articles for the month, the second of which is free if you're not a member. The first one, however, I get really personal about the artwork, especially the murals in one of my childhood homes, and explore how being surrounded by art influenced me in my earliest years and eventually led to my art historical interests. It even taught me how to look at art super young, how to think critically about it. So all in all, this article is an argument for featuring art in your kids' rooms. As for the second article, I recently got back onto Netflix and saw that Volume 4 of one of my favorite series, Love, Death, and Robots, had dropped, so I recap my favorites from that show. And now, honeys, your headlines. Follow-ups first. Frida Kahlo's El Sueño portrait sold for a record-breaking $55 million. The 1940 painting, showing Kahlo in bed with a skeleton, reflects a period of the artist's chronic pain and marital turmoil. The why we care here is that marks the highest price paid for a woman artist at auction, says ArtNet News reporting, bypassing the $44.4 million record set in 2014 by Georgia O'Keeffe's Jimson Weed White Flower No. 1. The sale also set a new auction record for a Latin American artist. We also heard the announcement that former Met President Daniel Weiss will lead the Philadelphia Art Museum. The naming of Weiss as new director and CEO on November 21st comes just about a week after the news of a lawsuit by its former director, Sasha Suda, against the institution, accusing it of wrongful termination. Weiss will start his 3-year contract at the Philadelphia Art Museum on December 1st. On to some brand new stories for the week. A 3,600-year-old Bronze Age city was discovered in northeast Kazakhstan. According to a report in Antiquity, a world archaeology journal published by Durham University in the UK, the city, dating to about 1600 BCE, was uncovered at an ancient site called Semiyarka, itself discovered in the early 2000s, and it covers nearly 250 acres in the northeast region. This work is being called, quote, the first detailed archaeological survey of Semiyarka, end quote, and provides insights into the region's transition from a nomadic community to a more permanent urban settlement. According to the Antiquity report, quote, these finds suggest that Semiyarka was likely a highly organized metallurgical center capable of controlled production, challenging assumptions about the absence of structured metal economies among semi-nomadic steppe communities, end quote. Art News reports that one of the authors of the report, archaeology professor at University College London, Milana Radivojevic, told the university's news site, quote, this is one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries in this region for decades, end quote. The arts nonprofit World Press Photo is commemorating its 70th anniversary with a limited-time print sale featuring works from 70 photographers across continents and eras, centering its photojournalistic focus. Notable prints among them include, according to our sources, Gunnar Tingsvall's iconic photo of Brazilian legend Pelé after his shot that won the 1958 World Cup, Neil Armstrong's picture of Buzz Aldrin on the moon, and John Rooney's portrait of a roaring Muhammad Ali. We also learned of an attempt by hundreds of Australian bagpipers to set a world record while playing AC/DC. The performance of It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll by 374 bagpipers took place a few days before the band played its first Australian show in a decade and broke the previous Guinness record established in 2012 for bagpiping attendance. The musicians gathered at Federation Square, the backdrop for the song's official music video nearly 50 years ago, and 2 of the 3 pipers in that OG video were in attendance playing along. Also last week, Gay Sheep made their high-fashion debut in New York City. The dating app Grindr debuted a knitwear collection by celebrity designer Michael Schmidt in New York City last week called I Will Survive, which featured pieces made with wool from Rainbow Wool, who culls it from the world's quote-unquote first flock of gay sheep in Germany. Owner of Rainbow Wool and openly gay man himself, Michael Stucke, rescues male sexually oriented rams, which represent up to 8% of all rams by various scientists' estimates, which he claims are often slaughtered because they don't procreate. The pieces, writes Hyperallergic, are, quote, inspired by fantasy and fetish, including Slutty Adam from Genesis and a woven Greco-Roman figure. They will be auctioned to benefit LGBTQ plus causes at a later date, end quote. Individual Ram sponsorships also start at $25. The Why We Care here is, as Stuka himself said in a press release, the fashion collection, quote, proves that being gay is part of nature itself, end quote. And Schmidt, who has designed for the likes of Madonna and Taylor Swift, said that the gay wool collection may be lighthearted, but addresses the serious topics of mistreatment of homosexual animals and more broadly prejudice against LGBTQ+ communities around the world. Circling back to sales for a moment, a Gustav Klimt portrait fetched a record-breaking $236 million at Sotheby's last week. The 20-foot-tall portrait of Elizabeth Lederer from 1914 through 1916 was only estimated at $150 million, but sold for that incredible price at the inaugural Brewer Building sale, making it officially the second most expensive artwork and the most expensive modern artwork ever sold at auction, plus the highest amount paid at auction for a Klimt work. The inaugural auction became, therefore, the highest single evening sale in Sotheby's history at $706 million total. Within the same week, his Blumenweiss became the artist's second most expensive landscape. The 1908 landscape was completed during one of the artist's summer retreats to Austria's Lake Attersee and sold for $86 million at Sotheby's Lauder sale, a bit above its $80 million estimate. However, we also heard that Christie's Paris suspended its sale of the first calculating machine, or at least one of only 9 surviving examples of calculators built by 17th century French mathematician and inventor Blaise Pascal. It had been scheduled for auction on November 19th, but Christie's suspended its sale after an export ban kept it from leaving France. The ban itself was prompted by arguments from French scientists and researchers that this object is a national treasure. The process to determine that status will take several months. Its sale was expected to bring in between $2.3 and $3.5 million, but its sale anytime soon is very unlikely now. And rounding out this section, one of Kurt Cobain's guitars is going to auction at Christie's with a high estimate of $5 million. The 1969 Fender Competition Mustang was used in recording sessions for the albums Nevermind and In Utero, as well as quote-unquote numerous prominent live performances. It was also featured in the Smells Like Teen Spirit music video. The guitar will hit the auction block in March. Turning to international news here, the Grand Egyptian Museum's ticketing policy has caused chaos and claims of discrimination. Images surfaced on social media showing thousands of frustrated visitors spilling onto the nearby Giza Plateau after being denied entry just days after the opening of the 2 decades in the making museum on November 5th. The museum's chief executive, Ahmed Ghonim, reported in a televised statement on the 14th that more than 27,000 tickets had been sold, way more than the daily limit of 20,000, before pledging to reassess the policies that have caused the chaos. Ghonim went on to say that management has struggled to accurately estimate visitor counts due to the constant flux in volume of people, and that the museum would be switching to an online-only booking system starting next month. Where it gets hairy is in regard to claims circulated online by Egyptians that the museum has reserved a disproportionately high share of tickets for foreigners at the expense of locals, allegedly an 80-20 split. Ghonim dismissed this split as simply a quote-unquote rumor and stated that on the 14th, 56% of the visitors were locals, despite what some of those social media posts might have you believe. He admitted, however, that the museum is looking into allocation strategies for Egyptians and tourists as a means of easing crowd control, but they promised the future split would never be greater than 60-40. The National reported that Freddie El-Bayadi, a Social Democratic member of parliament and outspoken critic of government policy, submitted an official request on the Saturday before last to abolish the ticket quota, saying, quote, "The heritage of our homeland is not a commodity. The right of Egyptians in their own land is not up for negotiation," end quote. We also learned that 2 UK museums are closing entirely next month, the Quaker Tapestry Museum in Kendal and the Museum of Carpet in Kidderminster, due to low attendance and rising costs. Bringing it back stateside, we learned that the Portland Art Museum unveiled its $116 million expansion/renovation project on November 20th. That project is more than a decade in the making, and the centerpiece of the remade campus will be the new Mark Rothko Pavilion, according to our sources. We also heard that the School of the Art Institute of Chicago has gutted its video databank. According to the Chicago daily publication New City, the institution has permanently eliminated the positions of 3 out of 5 employees at its video databank, or VDB, and additionally announced major cutbacks to the International Video Art Distribution Organization as of November 12th. The Why We Care here is pretty straightforward. forward, the VDB, quote, with an archive of over 600 artists and 6,000 video art titles dating from the 1960s to the present day, unquote, is one of the only repositories, archives of its kind in the nation. But still, the school is arguing that this was part of, quote unquote, necessary structural changes being done to ensure the long-term financial sustainability of the school. We've also seen expressions of concern that the functions of this archive, public access and collecting, are potentially at stake, according to a letter to VDB artists in which now former director Tom Colley raised concerns about the future of the bank. Quote, I have heard that there will be no new acquisitions or programming. The administration came to these decisions without the knowledge or input of VDB staff or others who understand VDB operations, mission, or values, end quote. Educators in the arts are particularly concerned with the future of the Video Data Bank education streaming platform launched last year, which made the bank's entire trove of video art, experimental film, documentaries, and artist interviews available to higher education institutions via a subscription streaming service. Last week also saw the art world speculating on why DC's Philip collection is selling off its masterpieces. The museum's decision to deaccession and sell off works by Georgia O'Keeffe, Georges Seurat, Pablo Picasso, Arthur Dove, and more has come under public scrutiny. Those and 7 additional works will be hitting the auction floor November 20th and are expected to fetch up to $14.8 million total. For its part, the Phillips collection says that the items put up for auction were determined by its board of trustees and that the proceeds will fund a permanently restricted endowment to commission new works by living artists, new acquisitions, plus care of the permanent collection. All motivations generally approved of by museum watchdog organizations, including the American Alliance of Museums and the American Association of Museum Directors. But the headline caught our attention because this sale can be seen as a sort of a case study in the wider and increasing national debates on deaccessioning, especially as a means of reducing financial pressures. Some argue that it is a, quote, necessary tool to keep collections relevant, end quote, while others believe it, quote, violates public trust and risks sanctions, end quote. The Phillips collection sale of works has generated widespread opposition from former curators, locals, a faction of the museum's non-governing members body, and most notably from the granddaughter of museum founders Duncan and Marjorie Phillips, Liza Phillips, who stated to the Washington Post, quote, we treasure those pieces. They are integral to the character of the museum. They belong to the public. They are now probably going into private hands. It's just a shame, end quote. All of these critics warned that the sales will dismantle the carefully built, quote unquote, units of key artists assembled by the couple. Notably, the dispute within the museum over this sale was only resolved 2 weeks ago after 18 months via an agreement between the trustees and members' boards that allowed these to move forward but tightens future deaccessioning rules. The Wall Street Journal's editor of Leisure and Arts, Eric Gibson, called the sale quote-unquote reckless in an opinion piece, comparing it to the Baltimore Museum of Art's controversial attempt to sell works by Andy Warhol, Bryce Martin, and Clifford Still to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion programs back in 2020, the BMA eventually canceled the sale of 2 artworks hours before the auction as a result of the uproar. Gibson went on to argue that fundraising efforts should be approached in more traditional ways and to look outside the frames for dollar signs. We additionally saw the new National Endowment for the Humanities' budget coming into question last week. More specifically, the art world was shocked to see that just 2 awards appear to cover nearly 10% of the agency's annual $207 million budget. For example, one worth $10.4 million is going to the conservative Jewish educational group Tikva to support the quote-unquote Jewish Civilization Project, which is aimed at fighting anti-Semitism. I'm aware my tone may be taken a certain way, but I only have it because the now-defunct National Council of the Humanities reportedly voted against awarding the organization this grant due to the vagueness in its application, as well as concerns that the project was too centered on advocacy. Furthermore, Tikva was not included in the original announcement of $34.8 million in grants for 97 projects by the agency on August 1st, but rather added later on September 15th. The NEH's acting chairman, Michael McDonald, additionally announced hundreds of smaller discretionary quote-unquote chairman's grants that can also be awarded without scholarly review. What we're seeing, honeys, is that concerns are rising about the arbitrary seeming nature of these awards, this late announcement, and the changes regarding grants, etc., etc., which threaten the trust in and the efficacy of the agency. The top Democrat on the congressional subcommittee in charge of the endowment, Representative Chellie Pingree of Maine, herself rebuked these recent changes, writing that, quote, "It has become increasingly apparent that the agency's ability to conduct grant-making has been seriously damaged," end quote, and that granting these awards without scholarly review is an, quote, "irresponsible approach to awarding taxpayer dollars," end quote. Representative Pingree called for a meeting on the matter, urging that the integrity of the NEH be rebuilt as, quote, "communities across the country are relying on it," end quote. The Met Museum staff also became the latest to move towards unionization last week. On November 17th, Local 2110 of the United Automobile Workers filed a petition with the National Labor Relations Board to represent more than 1,000 workers at the Met Museum of Art in New York, joining two smaller unions in existence there already, one for security guards and one for projectionists. The newly proposed union would include curators, conservators, educators, and retail workers, and collections manager Allison Clark said in a statement regarding its formation, quote, "Right now we're contending with several large-scale capital projects that displace people and create a lot of additional work for the staff. Unionizing is the only way for us to have a strong collective voice to address concerns with the museum," end quote. Not only is this a continuation of that unionizing trend, Art Forum writes, quote, "If the effort is successful, the Met would become the largest unionized museum in the country," end quote. We also learned that the Sperone Westwater founders are locked in a legal battle even as the gallery prepares to close. Sperone Westwater Gallery will shut down on December 31st after 50 years, quote, "As co-founders Angela Westwater and Gian Enzo Sperone have decided to pursue separate endeavors," end quote, according to gallery statements. The New York icon has long shown artists such as Bruce Nauman, Francesco Clemente, Susan Rothenberg, Enzo Cucci, David Lynch, Mario Mertz, but Art News reports that Sperone filed a lawsuit against Westwater, claiming that he was in a quote-unquote parasitic deadlock with her after she gained control of a corporation which had a 50% stake in their gallery back in August. The suit also accuses Westwater of, quote, "mishandling funds, withholding records from Sperone and gallery stockholders, and mismanaging rent payments for the gallery," end quote, according to Art News. All that to say that the fate of their gallery's current home, 257 Bowery, a few blocks from the new museum, is entirely up in the air as a result. We're also noting this closure because it's one of many closures of notable galleries within 2025. That list even includes Altman Siegel in San Francisco, New York's Tilton Gallery, and Tim Bloom's galleries. Announcements from the last week also included the arrest of 35 people with ties to a larger criminal art trafficking network in Bulgaria. According to Europol, investigations are still ongoing into the criminal network involved in the trafficking of thousands of cultural artifacts across Europe, which was busted by them along with Bulgarian authorities on Tuesday of last week. The arrests were made in connection to 131 searches in houses, vehicles, and bank safes, which resulted in the seizure of more than 3,000 recovered objects, including artworks, weapons, documents, electronic equipment, cash, and gold, whose total estimated value exceeds 100 million euros or 115 million US dollars. The investigation itself began after a house raid in Bulgaria in 2020 turned up approximately 7,000 cultural artifacts. The case has now involved law enforcement and judicial authorities from Albania, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, and the UK. And another bit of good news, the Gallery Climate Coalition's 5-year report projects that its members will halve their carbon emissions by 2030. The London-based enterprise, with 2,000 members of artists, institutions, and art professionals across 60 countries, announced that 80% of its members who began tracking their carbon footprint in 2019 are on track to meet their 50% reduction by 2030 goal and have already reduced their impact by 25%. These stats were revealed in the report titled 5-Year Review of Climate Action in the Visual Arts, which made its debut as part of London Art Plus Climate Week, a new initiative timed with the United Nations Climate Summit COP30 in Brazil. That reduction, as well as the coalition's growth from 200 galleries to more than 2,000 members, is incredibly impressive for this 5-year timeline. Francis Morris, former director of the Tate Modern and now chair of the coalition, told the art newspaper, quote, "The next 5 years will define the art sector's legacy in the climate transition. GCC invites all coalition members, partners, and allies to join us in this next phase, shaping a future where creativity and climate action move hand in hand, transforming not only our own industry, but the wider world it reflects and influences," end quote. Morris did go on to say, quote, quote, but carbon is only part of the story. The roots of this crisis lie in broader economic, social, and cultural systems that normalize overconsumption and disconnection. Tackling them demands not only technical solutions, but cultural transformation, and art has a unique and critical role to play in that shift, end quote. And we'll end our show here with two last headlines, the results of new reports, which I think tell a pretty interesting story when placed next to each other. The first one found that museums are spending a fraction of what they quote-unquote should on marketing. Remuseum, an initiative of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in connection with and funded by entrepreneur and Art News Top 200 collector David Booth, as well as the Ford Foundation, recently put out its second of 3 reports, and here is what they found. Museums invest on average less than 3% of their operating budgets on marketing, making them more comparable to the mining and construction industries than other cultural producers like movie studios, who spend up to half their budgets on marketing, or performance artists, who often spend up to 3 or 4 times what museums do on marketing. Those averages hold steady despite the fact that the report notes, quote, American museums have undergone a long period of expansion. Few are near capacity and can accommodate many more visitors, end quote. So, per research by consultant Colleen Dillon Schneider of Impacts Experience, museums should be investing anywhere from 13.9 to 18.7% of their annual revenues on things like paid advertising, social media, and public relations to achieve 90% or more of their quote-unquote market potential. The second new study, however, found that U.S. artists are struggling with food and healthcare insecurity. The national survey, commissioned by the Mellon Foundation in partnership with NYC at the University of Chicago, included artists across 5 artistic disciplines: performing arts, visual arts, writing, crafts arts, and the very obscure other arts, which were broken down into 37 artistic subdisciplines, but notably excluded those who reported only doing design, no other arts activities. The resulting 102-page report, quote, offers insights on how creatives live, work, and sustain their practices, but it also expands the understanding of who qualifies as an artist, end quote, says Art News. For example, the report found that 34% of artists are fully self-employed, while 50% are self-employed in their primary job, and 11% have balanced 3 or more jobs in the past year. Hi, hello, it me. The document also highlighted the realities of significant insecurity for many artists. More than 57% reported being, quote, somewhat or very worried about at least one form of financial vulnerability, including food, housing, medical care, or utilities, end quote. 22% reported having concerns about affording food, in addition to 32% reporting concerns about meeting medical costs. The why we care here should be pretty obvious, but I'll leave it to Gwendolyn Rugg, senior research scientist at NORC and lead author of the report, who stated, quote, artists contribute immeasurably to our communities, yet we have only ever had very limited data on them, which by and large did not reflect the full population of working artists and culture bearers in the U.S., end quote. She explained that the new information provides critical insight on creative lives, particularly on overlapping economic, professional, and personal challenges that could inform necessary investments, new public policy, and the formation of organizations to support U.S. artists in the years to come. And there you have it for November 25th. I hope you honeys have a wonderful holiday week. Please enjoy your time with friends and family. I'm wishing you all the best. I myself will be taking that time. So until we speak again, hydrate or dihydrate and take care. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.